Sarah Martinez stepped out of the yellow taxi and paid the driver with crumpled bills from her jacket pocket. The morning air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of salt water and diesel fuel that always hung around military bases near the coast. She pulled her worn canvas messenger bag higher on her shoulder and walked toward the main gate of Naval Base Norfolk. The security checkpoint looked the same as it had 15 years ago, though the technology had clearly been updated. Two young Marines in crisp uniforms stood behind bulletproof glass, their eyes scanning each person who approached. Sarah could see herself in their polished black boots and pressed uniforms. She had been just like them once, eager and ready to prove herself to the world. "Ma'am, please step forward," called one of the guards, a corporal with bright blue eyes and a southern accent. His name tag read Williams. Sarah approached the window and reached into her bag for her identification. Her fingers brushed against the various items she carried: a battered paperback novel, her phone charger, a small notebook filled with her handwriting, and, finally, her military ID card. She pulled it out and slid it through the small opening in the window. Corporal Williams picked up the card and examined it carefully. His eyebrows rose slightly as he read the information. He looked up at Sarah, then back down at the card, then up at her again. His partner, a lance corporal named Rodriguez according to his name tag, leaned over to look at the ID as well. "Ma'am," Williams said slowly, "this card shows a rank of Admiral. But you're not in uniform, and—" He paused, clearly unsure how to continue. Sarah smiled gently. She had expected this reaction. "I understand your confusion, Corporal. I'm not currently on active duty, but the ID is valid. I'm here for a meeting with Commander Harrison." The two young Marines exchanged glances. Rodriguez picked up a phone and made a quick call, speaking in low tones that Sarah couldn't quite hear. While he spoke, Williams continued to study her identification card and compare it to whatever information appeared on his computer screen. "Ma'am," Williams said finally, "we're going to need to search your bag. It's standard procedure for all visitors, regardless of rank or clearance level." "Of course," Sarah replied. She had nothing to hide, and she understood the importance of security protocols. She placed her messenger bag on the metal table beside the checkpoint and stepped back. Williams approached the bag with professional efficiency. He opened the main compartment and began removing items one by one, placing them carefully on the table. First came the paperback book, a thriller novel with a bent cover that she had been reading on the long flight from California. Then, her phone charger, tangled with earbuds that had seen better days. Next, he pulled out her small leather notebook. As he flipped through it briefly to check for anything suspicious, Sarah felt a moment of nervousness. The notebook contained her personal thoughts and observations from the past several months, including some rather unflattering comments about certain military policies. But Williams was clearly just doing his job, not reading her private writings. The search continued with various everyday items: lip balm, breath mints, a small packet of tissues, receipts from coffee shops and restaurants, and a few loose coins. Williams handled everything with care and respect, which Sarah appreciated. Then, his hand touched something unexpected at the bottom of the bag. He frowned slightly and reached deeper, pulling out a small wooden box about the size of his palm. The box was made of polished walnut with brass hinges and a tiny brass clasp. "What's in here, ma'am?" Williams asked, holding up the box. "Personal mementos," Sarah said simply. "You're welcome to look inside." Williams opened the clasp and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in dark blue velvet, were 3 military medals. Even in the fluorescent light of the security booth, the medals gleamed with the unmistakable shine of genuine military decorations. Williams stared at them for a long moment, then looked up at Sarah with new interest. Rodriguez had finished his phone call and came over to see what his partner had found. When he saw the medals, his expression changed completely. He leaned closer to examine them, and Sarah could see recognition dawning in his eyes. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said quietly, "is that the Navy Cross?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, along with a silver star and a purple heart." The two Marines stood in stunned silence. These were not the kind of decorations that were handed out lightly. The Navy Cross was the second highest military decoration for valor awarded only for extraordinary heroism in combat. The Silver Star and Purple Heart carried their own weight of honor and sacrifice. Williams carefully closed the box and handed it back to Sarah with noticeably more respect than he had shown before. "Ma'am, I apologize for any inconvenience. We need to complete our security procedures, but I want you to know that we understand the significance of what you've shown us." "No apology necessary, Corporal," Sarah said as she placed the box back in her bag. "You're doing your job exactly as you should." As Williams continued his search, other personnel in the security area had begun to take notice of the situation. Sarah could see a sergeant approaching from the main building, drawn by the unusual activity at the checkpoint. Behind him walked a lieutenant, her uniform crisp and her expression curious. The search revealed nothing else of particular interest: a small sewing kit, a travel-sized bottle of hand sanitizer, and a folded map of the Norfolk area. Williams completed his examination and began placing Sarah's belongings back in her bag with careful precision. "All clear, ma'am," he said formally. "Welcome to Naval Base Norfolk." Sarah shouldered her bag and was about to walk through the gate when the lieutenant approached. She was a young woman, probably in her late 20s, with intelligent brown eyes and the confident bearing of an officer who had earned her position through hard work. "Excuse me," the lieutenant said. "I'm Lieutenant Chun. I couldn't help but notice the discussion about your decorations. If you don't mind me asking, when did you serve?" Sarah studied the young officer's face. There was genuine curiosity there, not the kind of skepticism she sometimes encountered from people who couldn't believe that someone who looked like her could have earned such high honors. "I served for 22 years, Sarah said. "Retired about 3 years ago." "What was your specialty?" Lieutenant Chen asked. "Naval intelligence," Sarah replied. "I spent most of my career in various intelligence roles, with some operational assignments mixed in." The sergeant who had been approaching finally reached the group. He was an older man with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent many years in the service. His name tag read Thompson. "Is there a problem here?" Sergeant Thompson asked, his tone professional but concerned. Lieutenant Chun turned to him. "No problem, Sergeant. We were just meeting Admiral Martinez." Sergeant Thompson's eyes widened slightly. He looked at Sarah with new interest, taking in her civilian clothes and unassuming appearance. "Admiral Martinez? I don't believe we were expecting any flag officers today." "I'm retired," Sarah explained. "I'm here for a meeting with Commander Harrison about a consulting project." "Ah," Thompson nodded. Commander Harrison mentioned he was expecting a consultant today, though he didn't mention. He trailed off, clearly unsure how to finish the sentence. Sarah understood his confusion. Most people expected retired admirals to look a certain way, older men with gray hair and stern expressions, perhaps wearing some indication of their former rank. She was a Hispanic woman in her 50s, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, carrying a worn messenger bag. She didn't fit the stereotype. "He probably didn't think my rank was relevant to mention," Sarah said diplomatically. "The project is civilian in nature." Lieutenant Chun was still studying Sarah with obvious fascination. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what led you to naval intelligence?" "It's a field I'm considering for my own career development." Sarah smiled. She had been asked this question many times over the years, and she always enjoyed talking to young officers about career choices. "I started out wanting to be a surface warfare officer, actually. But during my junior officer years, I discovered that I had a talent for analysis and pattern recognition. Intelligence work appealed to me because it combined strategic thinking with the opportunity to make a real difference in operational outcomes." "That's exactly what attracts me to it," Chin said eagerly. "The chance to work behind the scenes, but still contribute to mission success." "It's challenging work," Sarah continued. "You have to be comfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty. Often, you're working with incomplete information and trying to piece together a coherent picture from fragments of data. But when you get it right, when your analysis helps prevent casualties or contributes to mission success, there's no better feeling in the world." Sergeant Thompson had been listening to this conversation with growing interest. "Ma'am, if I may ask, where did you serve?" "I've been in the Navy for 18 years, and I'm always curious about other people's experiences." Sarah considered the question. Much of her service record was classified, but She could share some general information. I served at various commands around the world. Spent time in the Pacific, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. Some shore duty in Washington, some sea duty on various platforms. Combat deployments? Thompson asked. Several, Sarah said simply. The way she said it made it clear that she wasn't going to elaborate, and Thompson respected that boundary. Many veterans were reluctant to discuss their combat experiences in detail, especially with people they had just met. Lieutenant Chin checked her watch. Ma'am, would you like me to escort you to Commander Harrison's office? I know where it is, and it can be confusing to navigate the base if you haven't been here recently. That would be very helpful, thank you, Sarah said. As they began walking across the base, Sarah noticed how much had changed since her last visit. New buildings had been constructed, old ones had been renovated, and the entire facility had a more modern feel. The technology was clearly more advanced, and the security measures were more sophisticated than she remembered. The base has grown significantly in recent years, Chin observed, noticing Sarah's interest in the changes. We've expanded our cyber warfare capabilities and added new training facilities. I can see that, Sarah replied. It's impressive. When I was on active duty, we were just beginning to understand how important cybersecurity would become. They walked past a group of young sailors engaged in physical training. Sarah watched them with a mixture of nostalgia and pride. They looked so young and eager, ready to take on whatever challenges the Navy might throw at them. She remembered feeling that same energy and enthusiasm when she was their age. Ma'am, Chin said quietly, can I ask you something personal? Sarah nodded. Go ahead. How did you handle the challenges of being a woman in the military, especially in intelligence work? I know things were probably more difficult when you were coming up through the ranks. Sarah considered the question carefully. It was something she had thought about many times over the years, and she had strong opinions about it. But she also knew that every person's experience was different, and what had worked for her might not work for someone else. It was challenging, she said finally. There were definitely times when I felt like I had to work twice as hard to prove myself. There were people who questioned whether I belonged, whether I could handle the pressure, whether I was tough enough for the job. How did you deal with that? Chin asked. I focused on being excellent at what I did, Sarah said. I made sure that my work spoke for itself. I learned everything I could, I volunteered for difficult assignments, and I never gave anyone a reason to doubt my competence or commitment. Did you ever face direct discrimination? Chin asked. Sarah nodded. Yes, sometimes. But I also had many mentors and colleagues who supported me and helped me advance. The military has come a long way since I started my career. Things aren't perfect now, but they're much better than they were 30 years ago. They had reached the administrative building where Commander Harrison's office was located. Lieutenant Chun led Sarah through the lobby and up a flight of stairs to the second floor. The hallways were lined with portraits of distinguished naval officers and displays showcasing the history of the base. Here we are, Chun said, stopping in front of a door marked with Commander Harrison's name and title. She knocked softly and waited for a response. Come in, called a voice from inside. Chun opened the door and stepped inside, with Sarah following behind her. Commander Harrison's office was spacious but not overly formal, with a large desk, several comfortable chairs, and walls lined with bookshelves and military memorabilia. Commander Harrison himself was a man in his early 40s with sandy brown hair and an open, friendly face. He wore the standard Navy working uniform and had the relaxed confidence of an experienced officer. When he saw Sarah, he stood up from behind his desk with a welcoming smile. You must be our consultant, he said, extending his hand for a handshake. I'm Commander Harrison. Thank you for making the trip out here. Sarah Martinez, she replied, shaking his hand. Thank you for the invitation. Lieutenant Chen cleared her throat softly. Sir, I should mention that Ms. Martinez is actually Admiral Martinez. Retired. Commander Harrison's expression changed dramatically. His casual demeanor shifted to something much more formal and respectful. Admiral Martinez? I apologize, ma'am. I had no idea. Your reputation precedes you, and it's an honor to meet you. Sarah waved off the formality. Please, I'm retired. Sarah is fine, and there's no need to apologize. You weren't expecting a flag officer, just a consultant. But Commander Harrison was clearly struggling with the protocol of the situation. Sarah could see the wheels turning in his mind as he tried to figure out the appropriate way to handle this unexpected development. She had seen this reaction many times before from officers who suddenly realized they were in the presence of someone much more senior than they had anticipated. "Sir," Lieutenant Chun said to Harrison, "Admiral Martinez was just sharing some insights about intelligence work with me. Her experience is quite impressive." Commander Harrison nodded, still looking somewhat overwhelmed. "Yes, I'm sure it is. Admiral, please have a seat. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be great. Thank you," Sarah said, settling into one of the comfortable chairs in front of Harrison's desk. As Commander Harrison busied himself with preparing coffee, Sarah reflected on the events of the morning. The bag search at the gate had been routine, but the discovery of her medals had clearly changed how she was perceived by the base personnel. It was always interesting to see how people reacted when they learned about her military background. She had worked hard throughout her career to be judged on her abilities rather than her appearance or background. But she also understood that first impressions mattered, and that sometimes her unassuming appearance worked in her favor. People underestimated her, which could be a significant advantage in intelligence work. Commander Harrison returned with 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from Sarah. "Admiral, I have to admit that I'm a bit embarrassed. When my superiors told me we were bringing in a consultant for this project, I assumed it would be someone from a civilian contractor. I had no idea we were getting someone with your background and experience." "That's perfectly understandable," Sarah said. "And honestly, it's probably better that way. If people know too much about my background going into a project, they sometimes have preconceived notions about what I'm going to recommend or how I'm going to approach the problem." "What kind of projects do you typically work on now?" Harrison asked. "Various things," Sarah said. "Sometimes I do consulting work for government agencies on intelligence-related issues. Sometimes I work with private companies on security assessments or risk analysis. And sometimes I do training and education work, helping to develop the next generation of intelligence professionals." "That sounds fascinating," Harrison said. "I imagine your perspective is quite valuable, given your operational experience." Sarah nodded. "I think the combination of strategic thinking and hands-on experience is useful. I've seen how intelligence work functions at every level, from tactical operations to strategic planning. That gives me a broad perspective on what works and what doesn't." Lieutenant Chun had remained standing near the door, clearly reluctant to leave, but uncertain whether she should stay for what was obviously going to be a high-level discussion. Sarah noticed her hesitation and decided to address it directly. "Lieutenant Chun," she said, "thank you for escorting me here. I enjoyed our conversation about intelligence work." "Thank you, ma'am," Chun replied. "If you have any other questions about career development and intelligence, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'd be happy to share more insights." After Chun left, Commander Harrison leaned back in his chair and studied Sarah with renewed interest. "Admiral, I have to ask, what made you decide to leave active duty? With your background and accomplishments, you could probably have continued advancing in rank." Sarah considered the question. It was something she had been asked many times since retiring, and she had developed a standard response. But sitting here in this familiar military environment, she found herself wanting to give a more honest answer. "I had accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish in uniform," she said finally. "I had reached the rank of Admiral, I had led successful operations, and I had made what I felt was a meaningful contribution to national security. After 22 years, I was ready for a new challenge." "And you found that challenge in consulting work?" Harrison asked. "Partly," Sarah said. "But I'm also doing some writing, some teaching, and some volunteer work with veterans organizations. Retirement has given me the freedom to pursue interests that I didn't have time for while I was on active duty." Commander Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "I can understand that. Sometimes I wonder what I'll do when my time comes to retire. The military becomes such a big part of your identity that it's hard to imagine life without it." "It is an adjustment," Sarah admitted. "But it's also liberating in many ways. You have the freedom to choose your own priorities and pursue your own interests without having to worry about military regulations or the demands of command." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Come in," Harrison called. The door opened to reveal a Master Chief Petty Officer with graying hair and the confident bearing of a senior enlisted leader. His uniform was immaculate, and his ribbons told the story of a long and distinguished career. "Sir," the Master Chief said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I heard that we have a distinguished visitor on base today." Harrison gestured toward Sarah. "Master Chief Rodriguez, I'd like you to meet Admiral Martinez." The Master Chief's eyes widened slightly as he took in Sarah's civilian appearance, but he quickly recovered and came to attention. "Admiral, it's an honor to meet you, ma'am." Sarah stood and extended her hand. "Please, Master Chief, no need for formalities. I'm retired." As they shook hands, Master Chief Rodriguez studied Sarah's face with obvious recognition. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, did you serve in the Persian Gulf region about 12 years ago?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Yes, I did several deployments in that area." "Why do you ask?" "I think I know who you are," Rodriguez said slowly. "Were you involved in an operation to rescue hostages from a terrorist compound near the Iraqi border?" Sarah's expression became more guarded. "I can't discuss specific operations, Master Chief." "Of course not, ma'am," Rodriguez said quickly. "I understand operational security. But if you are who I think you are, then I owe you a debt of gratitude. My nephew was one of the hostages in that operation." The room fell silent as the weight of Rodriguez's words sank in. Commander Harrison looked back and forth between Sarah and the Master Chief, clearly sensing that something significant was happening but not understanding the full context. Sarah studied Rodriguez's face carefully. "What was your nephew's name?" she asked quietly. "Petty Officer Second Class Miguel Rodriguez," the Master Chief replied. "He was a Navy corpsman attached to a Marine unit that was captured during a reconnaissance mission." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, remembering. The operation Rodriguez was referring to had been one of the most dangerous and complex missions of her career. 5 American service members had been captured by insurgents and were being held in a heavily fortified compound. The intelligence indicating their location had been fragmentary and unreliable, but Sarah had pieced together enough information to convince her superiors to authorize a rescue attempt. "Your nephew is a good man," Sarah said finally. "A credit to the Navy." "Yes, ma'am, he is," Rodriguez said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to you, he made it home to his family. He's a chief now, still serving as a corpsman. He has 3 children who wouldn't exist if you hadn't done what you did that day." Commander Harrison was looking at Sarah with a new level of respect and awe. "Admiral, I had no idea of the scope of your operational experience." 20 minutes later, Master Chief Rodriguez returned with news that the base commander, Captain Patricia Wells, was indeed eager to meet Admiral Martinez. Sarah found herself being escorted through corridors she remembered from decades past, though everything looked more modern and technologically advanced than during her active duty years. Captain Wells' office was in the main administrative building, a spacious room with large windows overlooking the harbor. The walls were decorated with naval flags, historical photographs, and awards recognizing the base's achievements. Behind the desk sat a woman in her late 40s with short blonde hair and the crisp bearing of a seasoned naval officer. "Admiral Martinez," Captain Wells said, standing immediately as Sarah entered. "This is truly an unexpected honor. I'm Captain Wells, commanding officer of Naval Base Norfolk." Sarah shook the captain's hand firmly. "Thank you for taking the time to see me, Captain. I hope I'm not disrupting your schedule too much." "Not at all," Wells replied, gesturing for Sarah to take a seat. "In fact, I've been hoping for an opportunity like this. I've heard quite a bit about your service record, though I understand much of it remains classified." "Some of it, yes," Sarah confirmed. "But I'm always happy to discuss general aspects of naval service and intelligence work." Captain Wells poured fresh coffee for both of them before settling behind her desk. "Admiral, I have to say that your visit couldn't have come at a better time. We're dealing with some complex challenges here at Norfolk, and having someone with your experience available for consultation could be invaluable." "What kinds of challenges?" Sarah asked, genuinely interested. "Integration issues, primarily," Wells explained. "We're bringing together personnel from different specialties and different branches of service for joint operations. The technical aspects are manageable, but the human elements, building trust, establishing effective communication, overcoming cultural differences between services, those are proving more difficult than anticipated. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Those are always the hardest problems to solve. Technology is relatively straightforward compared to human dynamics. Exactly, Wells agreed. I've read some of your published papers on interagency cooperation and intelligence sharing. Your insights into building effective partnerships across organizational boundaries were quite illuminating. Sarah was somewhat surprised that Captain Wells was familiar with her academic work. After retiring, she had written several articles for professional journals about lessons learned from her military experience, but she hadn't expected them to have much readership among active duty personnel. I'm pleased to hear that those articles were useful, Sarah said. The ideas came from hard-won experience in the field. That's exactly why they resonated with me, Wells continued. Too much of the literature on organizational cooperation is purely theoretical. Your work was clearly grounded in practical experience. Their conversation was interrupted by another knock at the door. Captain Wells called for the visitor to enter, and Sarah was surprised to see a familiar face. Commander James Mackenzie, someone she had worked with years ago during a complex operation in the Mediterranean. Sarah? Mackenzie said, his face lighting up with recognition and delight. I couldn't believe it when I heard you were here. How long has it been? Too long, Jim, Sarah replied, standing to embrace her former colleague. 8 years? 9. Something like that, Mackenzie agreed. What brings you back to Norfolk? Consulting work, Sarah explained. Though the day has turned into something of an unexpected reunion. Captain Wells watched this interaction with growing interest. Commander Mackenzie, I take it you and Admiral Martinez have worked together before? Yes, ma'am, Mackenzie replied. Sarah, Admiral Martinez, was the intelligence officer for a joint task force I was assigned to several years ago. One of the most professional and effective officers I've ever had the privilege to work with. Jim's being too generous, Sarah said modestly. We had a good team on that deployment. Everyone contributed to our success. That's exactly what I mean, Mackenzie said to Captain Wells. Admiral Martinez always gave credit to the team, even when her individual contributions were extraordinary. She had this ability to see the big picture while still managing the smallest details. Captain Wells leaned forward with obvious interest. Can you share any specifics about that operation? Mackenzie glanced at Sarah for permission before answering. Much of it is still classified, but I can say that it involved coordinating intelligence assets from multiple countries and services. The complexity was enormous. Different languages, different protocols, different security procedures, different cultural expectations. And Admiral Martinez managed to bring it all together? Wells asked. More than that, Mackenzie said. She created a framework that allowed all these different elements to function as a unified whole. By the end of the deployment, we had French, British, German, and American personnel working together so smoothly that you'd have thought they'd been training together for years. Sarah felt slightly uncomfortable with the praise, but she knew that Mackenzie was sharing these details for a reason. His description of her leadership style was accurate, and it was exactly the kind of experience that might be relevant to the challenges Captain Wells was facing at Norfolk. How did you accomplish that kind of integration? Wells asked Sarah directly. Sarah considered the question carefully. Several factors were important. First, I made sure that everyone understood not just their own role, but how their role contributed to the overall mission. People work better together when they can see the bigger picture. That makes sense, Wells agreed. Second, Sarah continued, I spent a lot of time on what you might call cultural translation. Different services and different countries have different ways of doing things, different terminology, different priorities. Part of my job was helping people understand these differences and find common ground. Can you give an example? Wells asked. Sure, Sarah said. The British intelligence officers were very focused on thorough analysis and careful documentation. The French were more action-oriented and willing to act on incomplete information. The Germans wanted detailed procedures for everything. Our own people fell somewhere in between these extremes. How did you manage those different approaches? Mackenzie asked, though he already knew the answer. I created a system that played to each group's strengths while addressing their concerns, Sarah explained. The British did most of our detailed analysis. The French led our rapid response capabilities. The Germans developed our standard operating procedures. Everyone had a role that matched their natural inclinations and national training. Captain Wells was taking notes as Sarah spoke. That's brilliant. You turned potential sources of conflict into complementary capabilities. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. But it required a lot of upfront work to understand each group's perspective and find ways to make them work together effectively. And ongoing management too, I imagine, Wells added. Definitely, Sarah agreed. There were plenty of bumps along the way. Misunderstandings, personality conflicts, disagreements about priorities. The key was addressing these issues quickly and directly before they could undermine the overall mission. Commander Mackenzie nodded emphatically. Admiral Martinez had this uncanny ability to spot potential problems before they became serious issues. She would see tension developing between individuals or groups and intervene just enough to resolve it without making anyone feel like they were being managed. That's a delicate balance, Wells observed. It is, Sarah acknowledged. You have to be sensitive to interpersonal dynamics while also keeping everyone focused on the mission. Sometimes that means having difficult conversations with people about their behavior or attitudes. Did you ever have situations where personality conflicts couldn't be resolved? Wells asked. Sarah nodded. A few times. In those cases, I had to make personnel changes. It's always unfortunate when talented people can't work together effectively. But the mission comes first. How do you make those decisions? Wells pressed. Carefully, Sarah said. I would try every reasonable intervention first. Changing responsibilities, adjusting team compositions, providing additional training or guidance. But if someone's behavior was consistently undermining team cohesion or mission effectiveness, I had to act decisively. Captain Wells set down her pen and leaned back in her chair. Admiral, I have to ask, would you be interested in spending some time here at Norfolk as an advisor? We're facing exactly the kinds of challenges you're describing, and your experience could be invaluable. Sarah was intrigued by the offer, but she also knew that getting involved in active military operations again would be a significant commitment. What kind of time frame are you thinking about? Initially, maybe a few days each month, Wells suggested. Enough time to observe our current operations, identify areas for improvement, and provide specific recommendations. If that goes well, we might discuss a more extensive arrangement. That sounds manageable, Sarah said thoughtfully. What specific areas would you want me to focus on? Integration of cyber warfare specialists with traditional intelligence personnel, Wells replied immediately. We're bringing together people with very different backgrounds and training, and the cultural differences are significant. I can imagine, Sarah said. Cyber specialists tend to be more individualistic and less hierarchical in their thinking. Traditional intelligence work is more team-oriented and structured. Exactly, Wells confirmed. We're also dealing with age differences. Many of our cyber people are quite young, while our traditional intelligence personnel tend to be more senior. The generational gap is creating communication challenges. Commander Mackenzie chimed in. We're seeing some resistance from both sides. The older personnel think the cyber specialists are too informal and don't respect established procedures. The younger people think the traditional approach is too slow and bureaucratic. Sarah had encountered similar dynamics during her own career as technology began to play an increasingly important role in intelligence work. Have you tried creating mixed teams where the two groups have to work together on specific projects? We've talked about it, Wells said, but we haven't implemented anything systematic. That might be a good place to start, Sarah suggested. Joint projects force people to learn each other's capabilities and develop working relationships. The key is choosing projects where both skill sets are genuinely needed. Do you have any specific suggestions for that kind of project? Mackenzie asked. Sarah thought for a moment. What about a comprehensive threat assessment for the base? Traditional intelligence methods would be needed to evaluate human intelligence sources and conventional threats. Cyber specialists would be needed to assess digital vulnerabilities and online threats. Both groups would have to work together to create a complete picture. Captain Wells's eyes lit up. That's perfect. We actually need to update our threat assessment anyway, and framing it as a joint project would give both groups a chance to show what they can contribute. And it would give you a chance to observe how they work together, Sarah added. You'd be able to identify specific areas where additional training or guidance might be helpful. This is exactly the kind of thinking we need, Wells said enthusiastically. Admiral, I hope you'll seriously consider our offer to serve as an advisor. Sarah was about to respond when they were interrupted by yet another visitor. This time, it was a senior chief petty officer with the weathered look of someone who had spent many years at sea. He knocked politely and waited for permission to enter. Captain Wells, the senior chief said, I apologize for the interruption, but I heard that Admiral Martinez was visiting the base today. I was hoping for a chance to meet her. Come in, senior chief, Wells said warmly. Admiral Martinez, I'd like you to meet Senior Chief Petty Officer Michael Thompson. He runs our intelligence training program. Sarah stood to shake Thompson's hand, noticing the firm grip and direct eye contact that marked him as an experienced professional. Admiral, Thompson said respectfully, it's an honor to meet you. I've been using some of your case studies in our training curriculum. Your work on multi-source intelligence fusion has been particularly valuable for teaching our analysts how to integrate information from different collection disciplines. Sarah was pleased to hear that her academic work was being put to practical use. I'm glad those case studies have been helpful. How are you incorporating them into the training? We use them as exercises, Thompson explained. Students have to analyze the same raw intelligence data that you worked with and try to reach the same conclusions. It's a great way to teach them about the analytical process. That's an excellent approach, Sarah agreed. Learning from real-world examples is much more effective than theoretical exercises. The students find it challenging, Thompson continued, but they also find it inspiring. They can see how careful analysis and creative thinking can lead to breakthrough insights that save lives and achieve mission success. Captain Wells had been listening to this exchange with growing appreciation for Sarah's reputation and influence in the intelligence community. Senior Chief Thompson, you should know that we're trying to convince Admiral Martinez to serve as an advisor here at Norfolk. That would be outstanding, Thompson said immediately. Admiral, we could really use your expertise. We're dealing with some significant training challenges as we try to prepare personnel for new operational environments. What kinds of challenges? Sarah asked. Integration of artificial intelligence tools into traditional analysis methods, Thompson replied. We have young analysts who are very comfortable with AI and automated systems, but they sometimes lack the foundational analytical skills to properly interpret what the machines are telling them. And the experienced analysts. Sarah prompted. They have excellent foundational skills, but many of them are resistant to the new technology. They don't trust automated systems, and they prefer to stick with methods they know work. Sarah nodded thoughtfully. It's a classic problem. The technology is advancing faster than our ability to adapt our training and procedures. Exactly, Thompson agreed. We need to find ways to combine the best of both approaches, the speed and capability of modern technology with the wisdom and experience of traditional methods. Have you considered pairing experienced analysts with younger colleagues for mentoring relationships? Sarah suggested. We've tried that informally, Thompson said, but it hasn't been very systematic. The personality matches haven't always been good, and we haven't provided much guidance on how to make the relationships productive. Mentoring relationships require structure and support to be effective, Sarah agreed. You can't just put two people together and hope for the best. Commander McKenzie had been quietly listening to this discussion, but now he spoke up. Sarah, this is exactly why we need you here. You have experience with all these issues: technology integration, generational differences, training challenges, organizational change. You've dealt with everything we're struggling with. Sarah appreciated the confidence that McKenzie and the others were showing in her abilities, but she also wanted to be realistic about what she could accomplish. I should point out that I've been retired for 3 years. The technology has continued to evolve, and I'm not current on all the latest developments. That's actually an advantage in some ways, Captain Wells observed. You have enough distance from the day-to-day operations to see the bigger picture, but you're not so far removed that you've lost touch with practical realities. Senior Chief Thompson nodded agreement. And your experience with organizational change is exactly what we need. The specific technologies will continue to evolve, but the human challenges of managing change are relatively constant. Sarah was beginning to feel genuinely interested in the possibility of working with the Norfolk team. The problems they were describing were complex and challenging, exactly the kind of issues she had always enjoyed tackling. And She had to admit that she missed the sense of purpose and immediate relevance that came with military work. "Captain Wells," she said finally, "I'd like to learn more about what you're envisioning. What would my role be specifically? What kind of authority would I have? What would success look like?" Wells smiled, sensing that Sarah's questions indicated genuine interest. "Your role would be primarily advisory. You'd observe our operations, identify areas for improvement, and provide recommendations. You wouldn't have direct command authority, but you'd have access to all relevant personnel and information. And success," Sarah prompted. "Measurable improvements in intergroup cooperation and operational effectiveness," Wells replied. "Better integration between traditional and cyber intelligence capabilities. Reduced friction between different generations of personnel. More effective training programs that prepare our people for current and future operational environments." "How would you measure those improvements?" Sarah asked, always thinking like an analyst. "Several ways," Wells said. "Productivity metrics, how quickly and effectively we can complete various types of analysis. Quality measures, accuracy of our assessments and predictions. Morale indicators, job satisfaction, retention rates, requests for transfer. And ultimately, operational outcomes, how well our intelligence products support decision-makers and mission success." Sarah appreciated Wells's systematic approach to measuring success. Too many organizations implemented changes without establishing clear metrics for evaluating their effectiveness. "What about timeline?" Sarah asked. "How long would this arrangement last?" "Initially, a 6-month trial period," Wells suggested. "That would give us time to implement some changes and see results. If things go well, we could discuss a longer-term arrangement." Commander McKenzie leaned forward. "Sarah, I have to say that this opportunity comes at a perfect time. The Navy is going through a major transformation in how we approach intelligence work. Having someone with your experience help guide that transformation could make a real difference for the entire service." "How so?" Sarah asked. "Norfolk is one of the Navy's primary intelligence hubs," McKenzie explained. "If we can develop effective models for integrating new technologies and different types of personnel, those models can be replicated at other bases and commands throughout the Navy." Senior Chief Thompson nodded enthusiastically. "And our training programs are used as templates for other commands too. Improvements we make here could have Navy-wide impact." Sarah found herself genuinely excited by the scope of the opportunity. She had always been motivated by the chance to make a broad impact, not just solve immediate problems. The possibility of helping shape the Navy's approach to intelligence work for years to come was appealing. "There's one more thing you should know," Captain Wells added. "This position would come with a security clearance restoration. You'd have access to current intelligence information and ongoing operations." That was significant. Sarah's clearance had been maintained at a basic level since her retirement, but access to current operational information would allow her to provide much more informed and relevant advice. "Captain," Sarah said slowly, "I have to say that I'm intrigued by this opportunity. It would mean making some significant changes to my current consulting arrangements, but the chance to contribute to this kind of transformation is appealing." "What would you need from us to make a decision?" Wells asked. "Time to think it over and discuss it with my family," Sarah replied. "Also, I'd like to spend a day or two observing your current operations before making a commitment. I want to make sure I understand the scope of the challenges and that I can genuinely add value." "Absolutely," Wells agreed. "Why don't we arrange for you to spend tomorrow observing our intelligence operations? You can see firsthand what we're dealing with, meet more of our personnel, and get a better sense of whether this is something you'd want to take on." Sarah nodded. "That sounds like an excellent plan." As their meeting began to wind down, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her day had changed. She had come to Norfolk for a routine consulting meeting and found herself considering a return to the world of active military intelligence work. The challenges they had described were exactly the kinds of complex, multifaceted problems she had always enjoyed solving. More importantly, she could see that her experience and expertise could genuinely make a difference. The Navy was at a critical juncture in its evolution, and having someone who understood both traditional methods and the need for innovation could help ensure that the transformation was successful. "Admiral," Captain Wells said as they prepared to conclude their meeting, "regardless of what you decide about the advisor position, I want you to know that having this conversation has been invaluable. Your insights have already given us some new ideas about how to approach our challenges. I'm pleased to hear that, Sarah replied. And Iwa the next morning arrived crisp and clear, with Sarah returning to Naval Base Norfolk wearing business casual attire that struck a balance between her civilian status and the military environment she would be observing. This time, the security check at the main gate proceeded smoothly. Corporal Williams and Lance Corporal Rodriguez recognized her immediately and greeted her with warm professionalism. "Good morning, Admiral," Williams said as he processed her identification. "Captain Wells left word that you'd be visiting our operations today." "Good morning, Corporal," Sarah replied. "Thank you for the efficient processing." She was met at the gate by Lieutenant Chun, who had volunteered to serve as her escort for the day. The young officer was clearly excited about the opportunity to spend more time with someone of Sarah's experience and reputation. "Admiral Martinez," Chun said enthusiastically, "I've prepared a comprehensive tour of our intelligence facilities. Captain Wells thought you might want to see both our traditional analysis center and our new cyber intelligence operations." "That sounds perfect," Sarah agreed. "I'm particularly interested in seeing how the two groups interact with each other." As they walked across the base, Lieutenant Chun provided background information about the changes that had been implemented over the past few years. "The cyber intelligence capability is relatively new," she explained. "We stood it up about 18 months ago in response to evolving threats in the digital domain." "How was the initial integration with existing intelligence operations?" Sarah asked. "Challenging," Chun admitted. The cyber specialists came from very different backgrounds. Some were prior enlisted personnel who had received specialized training, but others were direct recruits with civilian experience in cybersecurity or computer science. "Different cultures entirely," Sarah observed. "Exactly," Chun confirmed. "The civilians had never worked in a military environment before, and the prior service personnel had never worked in such a technical, specialized field. Both groups had to learn new ways of operating. They approached a modern building that Sarah didn't remember from her previous visits to Norfolk. The architecture was sleek and contemporary, clearly designed to house sophisticated technical equipment and operations. "This is our integrated intelligence center," Chun explained as they entered the building. "Traditional analysis on the first floor, cyber operations on the second floor, and joint operations in the center." The first floor buzzed with quiet activity. Sarah could see dozens of analysts working at computer workstations, studying displays, and collaborating in small groups. The environment felt familiar. It reminded her of similar facilities she had worked in throughout her career. "Admiral Martinez," called a voice from across the room. Sarah turned to see a lieutenant commander approaching with a welcoming smile. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Sarah Davis. Senior Chief Thompson told me you'd be visiting today." "Pleased to meet you, Commander Davis," Sarah replied. "I understand you run the traditional analysis section?" "That's correct," Davis confirmed. "We handle human intelligence, signals intelligence, and imagery analysis for the Norfolk area of operations. Would you like to see some of our current work?" Sarah nodded, and Davis led her to a workstation where two analysts were collaborating on what appeared to be a comprehensive threat assessment. The analysts, a petty officer first class and a civilian contractor, were comparing satellite imagery with communications intercepts and human intelligence reports. "This is exactly the kind of multi-source analysis that's essential for accurate intelligence," Sarah observed. "How do you ensure quality control when you're integrating so many different types of information?" "We use a structured analytical technique," Davis explained. "Each analyst has to document their sources, assess the reliability of each piece of information, and explain their reasoning for drawing specific conclusions." Sarah examined the work product on the computer screen. The analysis was thorough and well-organized, with clear distinctions between facts, assessments, and uncertainties. "This is impressive work," she said. "The methodology is sound, and the presentation is clear and professional." The petty officer first class, whose name tag read Johnson, looked up with obvious pride. "Thank you, ma'am. We've been working on this assessment for about 2 weeks, trying to get all the details right." "What's been the most challenging aspect of this analysis?" Sarah asked. "Correlating the timing of different events," the civilian contractor replied. We have communications intercepts from several different time zones, satellite imagery from multiple passes over the target area, and human intelligence reports that don't always have precise timestamps. How are you handling that challenge? Sarah inquired. We've created a timeline template that standardizes everything to coordinated universal time, Johnson explained. Then, we can overlay all our different information sources and look for patterns. Sarah nodded approvingly. That's exactly the right approach. Temporal analysis is often the key to understanding complex situations. Lieutenant Commander Davis led Sarah to another workstation where a different type of analysis was taking place. Here, a team of 3 analysts was working on what appeared to be a personality assessment of a foreign military leader. This is one of our specialized capabilities, Davis explained. We combine psychological profiling with intelligence about an individual's background, behavior patterns, and decision-making history. Sarah studied the work product with professional interest. This type of analysis had been a particular specialty of hers during her active duty years. How do you validate your assessments? She asked. We compare our predictions with actual behavior whenever possible, one of the analysts replied. Over time, that allows us to refine our methodology and improve our accuracy. And we collaborate with academic experts in psychology and political science, Davis added. They provide theoretical frameworks that help us interpret our observations. Sarah was impressed by the sophistication of the analytical work she was seeing. The quality was comparable to what she had experienced at the highest levels of naval intelligence, and the integration of different disciplines showed genuine innovation. Commander Davis, she said, this is excellent work. The analytical rigor is outstanding, and the integration of multiple perspectives is exactly what modern intelligence work requires. Thank you, Admiral, Davis replied. Now, would you like to see our cyber intelligence operations? They took an elevator to the 2nd floor, where the atmosphere was noticeably different. The lighting was dimmer. There were multiple large screens displaying network diagrams and data flows, and the personnel looked younger and dressed more casually than their colleagues downstairs. Welcome to our cyber domain, Lieutenant Chun said with a smile. This is where we monitor digital threats, conduct network defense, and support offensive cyber operations when authorized. Sarah was introduced to Lieutenant Junior Grade Kevin Park, a young officer who had joined the Navy after earning a master's degree in computer science from MIT. He was clearly brilliant, but Sarah could immediately see the cultural differences that Captain Wells had mentioned. Admiral, Park said, offering a casual handshake rather than a formal salute. It's cool to meet you. I've heard you did some groundbreaking work in intelligence fusion. Sarah appreciated Park's enthusiasm, but she could understand how his informal manner might create friction with more traditional military personnel. Thank you, Lieutenant Park. I'm impressed by the sophisticated equipment you have here. Yeah, it's pretty cutting edge, Park agreed, leading her to a workstation covered with multiple monitors displaying complex network maps. We can monitor traffic across dozens of different networks simultaneously and identify anomalies that might indicate cyber attacks or espionage attempts. How do you distinguish between normal network activity and potentially malicious behavior? Sarah asked. Machine learning algorithms, Park explained eagerly. We've trained our systems to recognize normal patterns, so anything that deviates significantly gets flagged for human analysis. Sarah examined the displays with growing appreciation for the technical complexity involved. This is impressive technology. How do you ensure that your automated systems don't miss subtle threats that might not trigger algorithmic detection? That's one of our biggest challenges, Park admitted. The algorithms are great at detecting known attack patterns, but they struggle with novel approaches or very sophisticated adversaries who know how to mimic normal behavior. Do you coordinate with the traditional analysts downstairs when you're trying to understand the context of cyber activities? Sarah asked. Park's expression became slightly uncomfortable. Sometimes, but they don't really understand what we do, and we don't always have time to explain technical details to people who aren't familiar with network operations. Sarah could see the problem immediately. The cyber specialists were operating in relative isolation from their traditional intelligence colleagues, missing opportunities for the kind of integrated analysis that could provide much richer understanding of threats and activities. Lieutenant Park, she said carefully, Have you considered that the traditional analysts might have contextual information that could help you interpret cyber activities more effectively? How do you mean? Park asked. For example, Sarah explained, if they know from human intelligence sources that a particular foreign organization is planning some kind of operation, that information could help you focus your cyber monitoring and better interpret any unusual network activity you detect. Park looked thoughtful. That's actually a really good point. We usually focus on the technical signatures of cyber activities without thinking much about the broader operational context. Lieutenant Chun had been listening to this exchange with obvious interest. Admiral, this is exactly the kind of integration that Captain Wells wants to achieve. Both groups have valuable capabilities, but they're not leveraging each other's strengths effectively. Sarah was beginning to understand the full scope of the challenge at Norfolk. The technical capabilities were impressive, and the personnel were clearly competent, but the organizational structure was creating artificial barriers between groups that should be collaborating closely. Lieutenant Park, she said, would you be willing to participate in an experiment? What if we brought some of the traditional analysts up here to observe your operations, and you spent some time downstairs learning about their work? I'd be open to that, Park replied, though I'm not sure how much the downstairs folks would understand about network operations. You might be surprised, Sarah suggested. Intelligence analysts are trained to understand complex systems and relationships. The technical details might be new to them, but the analytical thinking processes are very similar. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert on one of Park's monitors. Excuse me, he said, turning his attention to the screen. We're seeing some unusual activity on one of our monitored networks. Sarah watched with fascination as Park and his colleagues began analyzing the alert. Their technical expertise was clearly exceptional, and their response was swift and systematic. But she could also see opportunities where traditional intelligence methods might enhance their analysis. Lieutenant Park, she said when the immediate response was complete, do you have any information about who might be behind this activity? Not really, Park admitted. We can see the technical indicators, the attack vectors, the malware signatures, the command and control infrastructure, but we don't usually try to determine attribution unless it's really obvious. Have you considered that the traditional analysts might have sources or methods that could help with attribution? Sarah asked. Park paused, clearly thinking about the suggestion. We usually just focus on stopping the technical attack and documenting what happened. But you're right, understanding who's behind it and why could be really valuable. Lieutenant Chun was taking notes as this conversation unfolded. Sarah could see that the young officer was beginning to understand the potential value of better integration between the two groups. Admiral, Chun said, would you be willing to facilitate a joint session where both groups could work on a problem together? It might help them see how their different capabilities could complement each other. That's an excellent idea, Sarah agreed. What kind of problem would be appropriate for that kind of collaboration? Before Chun could answer, they were joined by Senior Chief Thompson, who had been observing the cyber operations from across the room. Admiral Martinez, he said, I think I have the perfect scenario for a joint exercise. What do you have in mind? Sarah asked. We've been tracking suspicious activity around the base perimeter for the past few weeks, Thompson explained. We have physical surveillance reports, communications intercepts, and now some cyber indicators that might be related. But we haven't been able to put all the pieces together into a coherent picture. Sarah's interest was immediately piqued. That sounds like exactly the kind of problem that requires multiple analytical approaches. What have you observed so far? Thompson outlined a complex pattern of activities that included unusual vehicle movements near the base, attempts to probe the base's wireless networks, and intercepts of communications that suggested intelligence collection efforts. Each piece of information made sense individually, but no one had been able to determine whether they were related or what they might indicate about potential threats. This is a perfect case study, Sarah said enthusiastically. You have physical intelligence, signals intelligence, and cyber intelligence all potentially related to the same situation. But you need analysts who can work across all those domains to develop a comprehensive understanding. Lieutenant Park was listening to this description with growing interest. I had no idea that the physical surveillance stuff might be related to the cyber probes we've been seeing. That's exactly the point, Sarah explained. Adversaries don't operate in just one domain. They use physical surveillance, electronic intelligence, cyber operations, and human intelligence collection in coordinated ways. To understand what they're doing, you need to analyze all those activities together. Senior Chief Thompson nodded agreement. Admiral, would you be willing to facilitate a joint analysis session on this problem? We could bring together personnel from both groups and see if they can develop a more complete picture working together. I'd be delighted to, Sarah said. When would you like to schedule it? What about this afternoon? Thompson suggested. We could set up a conference room with representatives from both groups and see what happens when they share information and analytical methods. Sarah was excited by the prospect. This kind of joint analysis session was exactly what she had specialized in during her active duty years, and it would give her a chance to observe the dynamics between the two groups while providing immediate value to their operations. Let's do it, she agreed. The afternoon session was held in a secure conference room equipped with multiple large displays and communication links. Sarah found herself facing a group of 8 personnel. For traditional analysts, including Lieutenant Commander Davis and Petty Officer Johnson, and for cyber specialists, including Lieutenant Park and a senior chief who specialized in network defense. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah began, we're going to try something that I think will be valuable for all of you. We're going to analyze a real operational problem using a collaborative approach that combines your different areas of expertise. She outlined the suspicious activities that Senior Chief Thompson had described, making sure that everyone understood the basic facts. Then, she divided the group into 2 mixed teams, each containing both traditional and cyber analysts. Your job, she explained, is to develop the most complete understanding possible of what's happening around the base. Team 1 will focus on developing a threat assessment. Team 2 will focus on identifying specific indicators that we should be monitoring going forward. The initial minutes of the exercise were somewhat awkward, as personnel from different backgrounds struggled to find common ground. But, gradually, Sarah could see connections beginning to form as analysts realized how their different perspectives could complement each other. Ma'am, said Petty Officer Johnson from Team 1. The cyber folks are showing us network probes that correspond exactly with the timing of some of our physical surveillance observations. That's not a coincidence. And the traditional analysts have background information about potential adversaries that helps us understand what the network probes might be looking for, added Lieutenant Park from Team 2. Sarah watched with satisfaction as the 2 teams began to develop increasingly sophisticated analyses. The traditional analysts provided context and helped interpret the significance of various activities, while the cyber specialists contributed technical insights about methods and capabilities. After 2 hours of collaborative work, both teams presented their findings. The results were impressive, detailed assessments that were far more comprehensive than either group could have produced working alone. Team 1, Sarah said, your threat assessment shows clear evidence of coordinated intelligence collection activities. You've identified specific techniques and patterns that suggest a sophisticated adversary with significant resources. And Team 2, she continued, your indicator list provides a framework for ongoing monitoring that addresses both physical and cyber domains. This will allow base security to detect future activities much more effectively. Lieutenant Commander Davis looked up from her notes with obvious excitement. Admiral, this approach has given us insights that we never would have developed working separately. The cyber indicators provide much more precise timing information than we usually have, and our contextual analysis has helped the cyber team understand what the adversaries were actually trying to accomplish. Lieutenant Park was equally enthusiastic. I had no idea that traditional intelligence methods could provide so much context for cyber activities. We usually think of network operations as purely technical problems, but understanding the human and organizational factors makes a huge difference. Senior Chief Thompson had been observing the exercise from the back of the room, and now he stepped forward with obvious satisfaction. Admiral, this is exactly what we needed. Both groups have learned something important about how to work together more effectively. Sarah was pleased with the results, but she also knew that one successful exercise was just the beginning of a longer process. This is a good start, she said, but sustaining this kind of collaboration will require ongoing effort and institutional support. What would that look like? Asked Lieutenant Commander Davis. Regular joint exercises like this one, Sarah explained. Cross-training so that each group understands the basics of the other's work. And, most importantly, changes to your organizational processes so that collaboration becomes routine rather than exceptional. Captain Wells entered the conference room just as Sarah was concluding her remarks. How did it go? She asked. Extremely well, Sarah replied. Both groups demonstrated that they can work together effectively when given the right framework and encouragement. Wells surveyed the faces around the room and could see the excitement and satisfaction of the participants. This is exactly what we were hoping for. Admiral Martinez, you've shown us something important about the potential for integration. The personnel are ready, Sarah said. What they need now is institutional support to make collaboration a regular part of their operations. Wells nodded thoughtfully. Admiral, I hope this convinces you to accept our offer to serve as an advisor. What you've accomplished in just one afternoon shows the potential impact you could have with a longer-term engagement. Sarah looked around the room at the faces of the analysts and specialists who had participated in the exercise. She could see genuine enthusiasm for the collaborative approach they had just experienced, and she knew that with proper guidance and support, they could develop even more effective methods of working together. Captain Wells, she said finally, I've made my decision. I'd like to accept your offer. The room erupted in spontaneous applause, with personnel from both groups showing their approval of Sarah's decision. Lieutenant Park was grinning broadly, and Lieutenant Commander Davis was already taking notes about how to implement collaborative procedures in their regular operations. Outstanding, Wells said. When can you start? Give me 2 weeks to wrap up my current consulting obligations, Sarah replied. Then, I can begin spending 3 days a week here at Norfolk. As the meeting broke up and personnel began filing out of the conference room, Senior Chief Thompson approached Sarah with a broad smile. Admiral, I can't tell you how excited I am about this arrangement. You've already made more progress on our integration challenges than we've managed in the past 6 months. The foundation was already here, Sarah said modestly. You have excellent people with strong capabilities. They just needed a framework for working together more effectively. Lieutenant Chun, who had been observing the afternoon exercise, approached with obvious excitement. Admiral, this has been an incredible learning experience for me. Would it be possible for me to work with you on some of the integration initiatives? I'd welcome your involvement, Sarah said. You have excellent instincts for organizational dynamics, and your perspective as a junior officer will be valuable. As Sarah prepared to leave the base for the day, she reflected on the unexpected turn her life had taken. 2 days ago, she had been contentedly pursuing her civilian consulting career. Now she was preparing to return to active involvement in military intelligence work, taking on challenges that would test all of her experience and expertise. But she felt energized by the prospect. The problems at Norfolk were complex and important, and she knew that her contribution could make a real difference in the Navy's ability to meet evolving threats. The opportunity to help shape the future of naval intelligence work was too significant to pass up. At the main gate, Corporal Williams was ending his shift as Sarah departed. See you soon, Admiral, he said with a respectful salute. Indeed you will, Corporal, Sarah replied, returning the salute with the crisp precision that had marked her 22 years of active service. As her taxi pulled away from Naval Base Norfolk, Sarah looked back at the facility where she would soon be spending much of her time. The challenges ahead were significant, but she had confidence in the personnel she would be working with and excitement about the potential impact of their efforts. Her return to the world of military intelligence was unexpected, but it felt right. The sense of purpose and the opportunity to contribute to something larger than herself were powerful motivations that her civilian work, rewarding as it had been, couldn't fully provide. The bag search that had started this entire sequence of events had revealed more than just medals and commendations. It had revealed a path back to the work that had always been her greatest passion, using intelligence and analysis to protect national security and serve something greater than herself. Tomorrow she would begin the process of transitioning back into this world, but tonight she would savor the satisfaction of a decision well made and a future full of meaningful challenges. The Admiral was coming home. And to you to know that I'm impressed by the thoughtful way you're approaching these issues. Many organizations try to solve human problems with technical solutions, but you clearly understand that successful change requires attention to both technical and human factors. Senior Chief Thompson stood up and extended his hand again. Admiral, I hope we'll have the chance to work together. Our training programs could really benefit from your experience, and our operational effectiveness could improve significantly with your guidance, Commander Mackenzie added. As Sarah prepared to leave Captain Wells's office, she realized that her brief return to the military world had rekindled feelings and motivations she hadn't experienced in several years. The sense of purpose, the intellectual challenges, and the opportunity to make a meaningful contribution to national security. These were powerful attractions that her civilian consulting work, rewarding as it was, couldn't fully replicate. Most of it is classified, Sarah said simply. And, honestly, operations like that are team efforts. I provided intelligence support, but there were many other people who made that rescue possible. Ma'am, Rodriguez said. With your permission, I'd like to inform the base commander that you're here. I think he would very much like to meet you. Sarah hesitated. She had come here for a simple consulting meeting, not for a reunion with her military past. But she could see the genuine respect and gratitude in Rodriguez's eyes, and she knew that sometimes these connections were important for morale and unit cohesion. If it's not too much trouble, she said finally. Rodriguez smiled broadly. No trouble at all, ma'am. It would be our honor. As the Master Chief left to contact the base commander, Sarah settled back into her chair and picked up her coffee cup. The morning had taken an unexpected turn, but she found herself enjoying the reminder of why she had loved her military service so much. The sense of purpose, the camaraderie, and the knowledge that her work had made a real difference in people's lives. These were the things that had sustained her throughout her career.